Hi, I'm Alice Chao. I'm the author of Shanghai Immortal, which is a novel about a half fox spirit, half vampire sasshole with a huge amount of chaotic energy.
Alice Chao is the #1 Sunday Times bestselling Chinese-Canadian author of the new adult fantasy, Shanghai Immortal. This is an exciting adventure fantasy where East meets West, and it all centers around a sassy half-vampire, half-fox spirit who just wants to take down her enemies. Hi, I'm Gemma, and welcome to the red carpet. Alice is here with us today to discuss their debut novel, Shanghai Immortal. Hi, Alice. We're so excited to have you join us today.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. In your book, we meet Lady Jing, who's not quite so ladylike. I adored her ruthless attitude and her ability to show us just what girls can do. To start, can you tell us about your book?
So Shanghai Immortal is about Lady Jing seeking vengeance. And she's the ward to the King of Hell. She's very chaotic and messy and irresponsible. But then a mortal gets in the way of her plans. And she kind of has to grow up a little bit.
And I enjoyed going on this journey with her.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
One of the charms of your book is all the Chinese mythology you drew upon. Could you tell us a little bit about the inspirations behind these?
So I grew up in a Chinese family, and one of the movies that I watched when I was 13 was a Chinese ghost story, and it blew my mind. There was ghosts with beautiful robes flying around. There was a himbo who was so innocent that he didn't know when people were making passes at him. And he saved the day, and there's just so much of that mythology brought into the story and then interpreted in a different way. And I think Hong Kong cinema does that so well, where they take jiangshi or very like gods and demons and just kind of create new ways of telling those stories. So I think that really inspired me to just kind of mash it up in Shanghai Immortal.
And I love seeing those themes in your book as well. The main character, Lady Jing, is mixed. She's half vampire and half fox spirit, a mix of East and West. Why did you write her in this way?
She is actually a metaphor for a diaspora experience. So I grew up in Canada, one foot in very firmly in Canadian Western popular culture, and then my family is from Taiwan, and so they're kind of more of a traditional conservative family. So Lady Jing is very much speaking to my childhood and that experience of kind of being a bridge between two very different cultures.
I think a lot of people can also relate to being East and West as well, especially those from immigrant families.
For sure, yeah.
Jing is different from the usual protagonists in fantasy books. She's an immortal, nearly 100 years old, with a fierce personality. Did you feel there is a need to break the norm in the fantasy genre?
Breaking the norm, maybe not, but I wanted to add a new voice. And Lady Jing is very much, she is not your typical Chinese deity. She doesn't fit into any of the Chinese stereotypes for women. She is not demure. She is not submissive. She is not delicate. She is not like super well groomed and polite. And I think there's room for that. I think there's room for characters who are just take the mold and kick it apart and stomp on it.
Oh, absolutely. I really love seeing how different she was than what we usually expect from women as characters. So that's why I really enjoyed watching her, having to grow up. So this was so different for me. That's why I really love the book.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted. For me, writing her, she was very cathartic. I wrote her during the pandemic, and everybody was in lockdown, and there were so many things you couldn't do. And this character is just somebody who just doesn't care. She does what she wants and is totally unapologetic.
Role model aspirations right there. Even though Jing is near 100 years old, the characters in the book keep telling her she needs to act her age. How does she change during the book?
She goes through a lot of self-reflection, I think, and she realizes things that she didn't know before. And that in itself causes her to pause and be like, oh, is my worldview actually what I really thought it was? And I think that is quite impactful for people. Like, when you find things out where you thought oh, I thought this all along, and actually, no, that's not how it was. So, for example, during the pandemic, there was a lot of anti-Asian hate crime. And something beautiful that came out of it was all the outpouring of stories from Asian Americans, British Asians, or British Isia, and the idea that, so many people were like, oh, when I was a child, I really hated that my parents did this. They never said, I love you. And it was very hurtful because I didn't think they loved me. But actually, there's so many different languages of love, and a typical one, a very common one in Chinese culture or East Asian culture is love. Love is spoken through service. And what I thought was so interesting was so many adults were realizing this and, musing on this and saying, actually, I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now, that I was loved the whole time. I just didn't know how to speak that language. And so like for Jing, I think a lot of that is this kind of realization.
Yeah, and I think we'll get deeper into that later on as well. But I wanted to speak that, like, as well in my family, they don't say, I love you. It's, did you eat yet?
Yes, did you eat? Or like spending hours chopping vegetables, preparing food, and then being like, oh, eat more. What, you just had dinner? No, you can't possibly be full. You must eat more, It's that kind of, that's a real, they are saying I love you. And every time they try to shove food in your mouth.
My mom still does that. Oh, you're getting a little big, but did you eat enough? Have some more.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of love, Jing also has a love interest, a mortal named Mr. Li, who couldn't be more different than her. Would you tell us about his role in the story?
Oh, he is the sunshine to her grumpy. And he's basically her foil. He is the experiences and the values that she eschews. And watching him and spending time with him helps her learn and see broader than her own experience.
Opposites attract.
Yes, absolutely.
But he also helps her grow.
Absolutely, yes.
Your book is titled Shanghai Immortal because it takes place in two different Shanghais, the one we know and its counterpart city in hell. This Shanghai in hell is the opposite of the mortal Shanghai and is the home to the supernatural. This was such an intriguing idea, even for the fantasy genre. Can you explain how you came up with this concept?
I actually don't know. It just was something that seemed natural to me, where the gods, they live in their own kind of dimension, and then the mortals live in another dimension. And I thought, well, they're gods, they can choose anything. Why not have something where they're like, oh, this is very comfortable to me. It reminds me of whatever the past and an eye to the future. So that's what immortal Shanghai looks like.
It's different than the Greek Olympians where they just live up a walkable hill.
Yeah, these guys, they like the city. They like, they're like, I want good food too.
Yeah.
I want to go to the street shops and I want nice bridges and nice buildings. So.
What aspect of the book do you hope leaves the biggest impressions on your readers?
I really hope readers come away with the message that you are who you decide you are, and that you can make a U-shaped space in the world and claim it as your own, and not to let anybody define you.
Oh, I love that. That's the kind of message I would have needed as a younger person, as a younger Gemma.
Me too, totally. Like, so.
Yeah, I'm glad you wrote a book about making your own space, because too many times have we tried to fit into spaces that we thought we didn't belong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have any memorable moments while writing this book?
I really enjoyed writing the drinking scene. So the friendship, there's a few scenes of friendship, and there's one where Jing and her friends Gigi and Along and Tony, they get totally wasted. And I had to cut it short because it was like, it went on. But I had so much fun writing that scene. It was great.
Oh, I love that scene too, because that's one of the moments where she realizes she's so loved. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She needs that.
Yeah, she really does.
Thanks for giving us all that information on your book. Now I'd like to get deeper into the characters and background. One of the things I found interesting was that Lady Jing is also the ward of the King of Hell, so there's a certain decorum expected of her, and yet she shatters this. Was this commentary on societal expectations to be ladylike?
Yes, there's definitely that. Lady Jing definitely does not like to conform to societal expectations, but it's also speaking to the special relationship that she has with this all-powerful, very masculine being. And she kind of is this tiny little insignificant thing. And she constantly is like poking and provoking. And the way that he reacts is very much like, I I have a lot of Chinese uncles who I'm very fond of, who are very serious, but so full of love. And so it's that kind of like dynamic, you know, the bratty kid, like with Leon, where you have like the assassin in that movie, where it's like this tough assassin who like, you know, murders people with like his finger, like a little pinky, and this little kid who's a really bratty, and yet he is very indulgent with her. And so that's very much that dynamic.
It was really interesting to read their differences in characters and just how she's expected to act, and yet he puts up with it still.
Yeah, I mean, he's still conservative. He still wants her to cover her knees and stuff, and she's just like, whatever.
Additionally, the main character is very spiteful and angry, and she takes the first opportunity she gets to take down her enemies. Other characters call her out for her fury, but she never really changes this aspect of her personality. Can you talk about embracing feminine rage in your book?
Oh, I loved it. It was so cathartic. And yeah, I think as women, we are constantly told like, oh, don't do that. Oh, don't stir the pot. It's not nice to be so angry. And why not? Why can't she be angry? I think she has a lot of legitimate reasons to be angry. And I think it's really unhealthy to push that down, you know, especially if the world is not fair to you. I mean, the world isn't fair, but you know, if you push that down and swallow it all the time, it's quite toxic, you know, and it turns, and you can see that in Jing. She has that anger, and she's not supposed to express that. And yet, and it comes out in bad ways often, and self-sabotaging ways. So yeah, I'm like, let it out, be angry, you know, deal with it. It's good.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love her, that she was just so unashamed to be angry and let that drive her and motivate her.
Yeah, 100%.
We mentioned that Mr. Lee is Jing's opposite in the book. He stands out to me because he's not like the arrogant male romance leads we often see these days. Was this a commentary on masculine representation?
Yes, absolutely. He is a sample. He is an example of Chinese masculinity, East Asian masculinity, actually, that isn't in the Western mold. And we just don't see enough of that in media. Now with Netflix, I think people are really coming to see that and coming to appreciate it. But in novels, I think in fantasy novels, they're not really common. And I really wanted to have a bloke who was a love interest, who was, you know, sexy, and yet wasn't your alpha male. And I mean, he's been described as a cinnamon roll, and he is more towards that. But this is a very specific kind of masculinity that is in here. And so, yeah, that's what he is, and I love it. And he's kind of, you know, he's sexy, but he's gentle, and he's like noble. It's like all that, really yummy.
Yeah, as a side note, I think that it's really toxic and kind of harmful to have such aggressive men be representation for what romance should be. Yeah. And especially for a young adult audience, having someone like Mr. Lee, who is gentle and kind towards Jing, and let her know what love could be without, you know, all that aggression.
Yes, absolutely.
So wonderful.
Yeah, it's like a very kind of caring sort of relationship and dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Lady Jing discovers love in places where she thought there was none. Can you talk about how this impacts her character?
So she has a shift in perspective, and I think that helps her grow, because it's this sudden awareness, like, wait, what I thought wasn't true. What I assumed of everybody isn't the way it was. And, you know, the self-reflection, I mean, she could be somebody who has no self-reflection, which means she would never grow, but she has that, and she's able to look at her worldview and adjust it. But I mean, it does come at a cost. It's not, you know, it's not easy for her. And there's a lot of painful memories and things that cause her to be the way she is. But I think, yeah, being aware and learning about friendship and about how you can sacrifice for people you care about and just do things for them, but not have to always declare it and tell them that there's something really special about that.
I especially loved her relationship with Gigi and the king. She wasn't aware, but when she realizes, oh, they love me in other ways, that was such a moment of growth for her.
Yeah, 100%. You know, she like part of what I wrote here was because during the pandemic, when I wrote this book, there was all the anti-Asian hate. And there was also paired with that an outpouring of stories from diaspora, second generation, third generation people who had lived through they grew up with Western media, with the assumptions and how you're supposed to behave, the declarative love that they were seeing on TV and in the movies. And, you'd go home and like in my Chinese family, like my dad doesn't tell me he loves me. Like that's just something that just like, you'd be like, oh yeah. Like it's very, it is not a declarative kind of thing that he does. And I read so many stories of people who grew up and they were saying when they were a child, they were really angry. They thought their parents didn't love them because they just didn't show it by saying I love you. And then as they grew up and looked back, they were like, oh, they showed me they love me in so many other ways. And it's because media doesn't show that. They didn't as children, you don't know, you don't think that way. And so I think for Jing, it was really important to show these relationships where people did things for her or people did things for other people to model that behavior and for her to realize and be like, oh, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah, something that I also recognize where I was like, oh, acts of servitude, acts of services also is a form of love.
Yeah. There's the 5 languages, or I think there's more than that, but there's the gifts, there's the touch, the declarative, the service. I can't remember what the other ones are, but like all of those are expressed in different ways and in different cultures. You have things that are more popular and other types that are less popular. And it's just nice to have different examples in literature and for people who are outside the culture to experience that, and for people who are inside the culture to identify with it and be like, oh, yeah, I recognize that.
Yeah, I think identity is a really good word for that.
Absolutely, yes.
I noticed quite a number of opposites in the story. A main character who represents both East and West, a mortal paired with an immortal, and the story takes place in both the familiar Shanghai and the immortal Shanghai. Was this theme intentional?
No. Not at all. It wasn't until you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, that's so true. But I think for me, I was trying to create bridges. Like with the diaspora, she's, different parts of her, like the folk spirit, the vampire, Western and Eastern, and the 2 different Shanghais, the mortal and the immortal. Like it's about bridging those opposites. So I guess in a way, it's adjacent to my purpose, but it wasn't something that I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do.
I was a step behind on the theme. But I think bridging it is a good way to put it. They're like mirrors, but when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we're looking at a reflection of ourselves and trying to figure out who we are. And you're bridging that through your story.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, I'm going to use that from now on.
One thing I was curious about was the time period. The book takes place in the jazz age of the 1930s. Why did you choose that time?
That was intentional. So again, because of the pandemic and the anti-Asian hate crimes that were happening, I chose 1930s Shanghai specifically because it was a treaty port, and during that time, Chinese people were really considered like animals, like less than human. On top of that, which is a weird feeling for me, is that when it's a treaty port and there's foreign concessions in China, as somebody who grew up in Canada with Chinese parents in a majority space, it's a space that I recognize and am familiar with. And most diaspora who grew up in Western societies will recognize it too. Be like, oh yeah, the British concession, they've got a pub, it's great. But at the same time, you're in China, so there's familiarity there too. So that was another layer that made me choose that specific place. And then it's also, the year is 1935. It's 2 years before the Japanese attack Shanghai. So it's 2 years before they declare the Sino-Japanese War happens. And then Chinese Civil War is also happening. There's a lot of turbulence. And so I wanted that to be the anchor for this story because it is quite lighthearted in many ways. But I think because, the pandemic was at the back of my mind, there's a lot of anxiety there, and it just felt like the story needed that anchor to reflect some of the modern times and a lot of the issues that we have in the modern day.
Your debut novel is now out in the world, and you're touring the US to promote Shanghai Immortal. What kind of responses are you getting as you meet these readers in person?
It's amazing. It's really great. Some have already read it because it came out in the UK in June. So, for example, the Fairy Loop that you have behind you, that was shipped out to the US way back in June. And so it's nice to see readers who already are familiar with Lady Jing and then meet readers who have yet to discover her. So that's been really nice. And it's really exciting. I'm thrilled.
And like I said many times, I'm really thrilled to have you here to get to pick your brain about everything that goes on in the book. In your bio, it said something that made me curious. You said self-perceived versus imposed identity and belonging fascinates you. Could you talk about what this means?
So it's the idea that society has a certain gaze and they place expectations. So those are the stereotypes. You know, your model minority, the good Chinese girl, or the dragon lady, right? And those are all externally imposed. And I think that can be internalized. You know, the model minority, that definitely can be internalized. And then you have your own identity. How do you see yourself? And like Jing sees herself in a certain way, and everybody else sees her in a different way. And, you know, the idea that she should have a lot of decorum. And she doesn't see herself that way, but people impose that on her. So that where those things meet, that friction, I find it really interesting. And how that then affects how you behave in groups and whether you consider yourself to belong and whether they consider you to belong. And so like how that kind of mixes up and affects dynamics between relationships. Like that's the exploration here in the book. And it's just, I think it's something that I grappled with growing up. And I think a lot of hyphenated kids grapple with that. You know, they think that they're a certain way or they think they're not a certain way. And society might think, oh, well, you know, you're Asian, you should be great at math. And like, if you're not like that at all, what if you're sporty? What if you're arty? Like, and that's trying to, what I was saying before, trying to carve a space for yourself that fits you, how you feel inside your true self, and not letting other people say, oh no, I'm going to give you a space like this. That's where you should fit yourself. It's like, no, you do it for yourself and you claim that space and don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Oh, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
We are a K-pop station. Do you have a favorite group or song to share?
Yes, they're called Hyago, and the song is Comes and Goes. I really love it. Most people don't know them, and I don't know that much about them, except I love their album, I love their sound. It's very jazzy and funky and just so cool.
I haven't heard of them, but I'll be sure to check them out. Your new book, Shanghai Immortal, was just released this fall in 2023. Can you give us your most favorite line from the book?
Oh, can I read it?
Yeah.
Yeah, here we go, because I can't remember all of it. So this is my favorite line. This is the line that the whole thing started with. With a title like Lady Jing of Mount Kunlun, an ancestry that includes the great goddess, Queen Mother of the West, you'd expect me to be beautiful. All hair, tatas, and ass, held together with lashings of poise and dignity. Well, I'll disabuse you of that notion right now. And I think that says it all. That is Lady Jing in a nutshell.
That's the line that made me want to read the book in the first place.
Oh, really? Oh, good. I'm so glad.
I think you picked a really good line. I'm really hoping that there will be a sequel to this book. Is there anything you can share about what you're writing next?
This is a trilogy. Yep. So there is a sequel. I'm working on it at the moment, and it is called Paris Celestial. It is set in Paris, and it is about Lady Jing's vampire side.
Yay! We didn't really explore her vampire side in this book, so I'm really excited to now get to explore both sides of her.
Me too.
Now that your debut novel is out, I'm sure that's another thing crossed off your bucket list. What are you looking forward to next?
I'm doing a lot of conventions. I really like meeting readers. I like traveling. So this book tour has been really exciting. And then I'll be in Hong Kong Literary Festival in March. and then in Stockholm for another festival in the summer of 2024. So those are all really exciting. And then I've got a secret idea, or a secret novel that I'm working on, which I can't really write very much right now because I'm working on book 2, but that's like something that's in the pipeline.
Well, I'm very excited for whatever it is. And also, I'm very excited that you're here.
Oh, I'm super excited to be here. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Where can we find your book for purchase?
It is in all good bookshops. So it just came out in the US on the 17th, and Barnes & Noble has it. It's on Amazon. A lot of indies carry it as well. So yeah, just do a little Google. You'll find loads. I have it on my Linktree as well.
And where can we find you?
I am on Instagram at AY_Chao. And I'm also on Twitter. I'm not there on very often, but you can find me also AY_Chao. And I have a website, aychao.com.
My guest today has been AY Chao with the fantasy adventure book, Shanghai Immortal. To hear from more shining Asian writers, check out our other interviews here on the red carpet. I'm Gemma for the KPOP-TV Broadcast Entertainment Network, and I'll see you next time.